Hello everybody and welcome to our Crushing Comics Book Club read of Grant Morrison's Batman. This is an exciting episode because we are going to tackle the first arc written by Grant Morrison. That is the arc called Batman and Son, and it is in issues 655 through 658. Clearly we're going to do some spoiling of the story because we're talking about the story. We're going to try not to get ahead of ourselves, but we all have read variously a little bit past this and of course into Modern Batman too. So that comes with a little bit of a spoiler warning. Two more comments before we get started. One, if you weren't aware, Grant Morrison's pronouns are they, them. And so we are going to use the they, them pronouns as everyone should. If we make a mistake, we're just going to correct ourselves and move forward. It's not about us. It's about Grant Morrison. The second thing is we are going to briefly be talking about a topic related to sexual assault in our discussion starting around issue 656. We do give a pretty solid content warning when we approach it, but just so you know, and we understand if that's not something for you to listen to, that's fine. And we'll see you again next episode. Before we dig into Batman and Son, Fariha, I understand that there are two brief story excerpts in the Grant Morrison Batman Volume 1 Omnibus before we get to 655. What are they, and should people be worried about fully understanding them quite yet?
So these are from the 52 series that came after Infinite Crisis series. And we have issue 30 and 47, not even the complete issues, but the Batman version aspects of it in here. And both of those stories kind of come in play in a separate story arc that we're going to talk about in a future episodes. So I mean, you can definitely read it if you're following the omnibus, but you be warned that you will be like, okay, why were they there for the first, at least for this episode or all the material that we're covering this episode. So I think we will it'll be more interesting to talk about it in a later day.
Yeah, go ahead and read them, but our in-depth discussion of those will come not too long from now when we dig into the stories that refer to them more specifically.
Yeah, and that's when you read it, you're going to see that it's not going to be very in-depth.
They're not the most fleshed out parts of even a 52, but hey, it's important for later in a sense.
So. Right.
So we find ourselves beginning with Batman 655, and we're going to talk about this arc, some elements of this arc all at once, but there's some issue by issue elements that we're going to try to tackle in order. So we start with 655 here, and right off the bat, Morrison is giving us a status quo, right? That Batman has really cleaned up a lot of the crime in Gotham, save for a few scant people, Two-Face and Joker. And the implication I got, having not read all of 52, was that this is because he came back from 52 really looking to make a change. He saw the man in the mirror, wanted to make a change. And two things happen that are really worth discussing. One is that there's some kind of rogue cop in a Batman uniform who shoots the Joker in the face, but everybody thinks it was Batman. And the other thing that happens is that Alfred really thinks that Batman should focus on being Bruce Wayne. Or is it that Bruce Wayne should focus less on being Batman? These two things turn into big themes in Grant Morrison's run. So, Harry, why don't we actually start with the Batman Bruce Wayne aspect? What do you think? Do you think Batman is the main identity, or do you think Bruce Wayne is the main identity of Batman, both in general and as we're beginning this story here?
That is such one of those oddly complicated questions, and the answer kind of shifts on which era you're in. I mean, at this point in the comics, we are coming off of Infinite Crisis, which is kind of the culmination of some very more conflicted stories with Batman, some pretty grim times, some horrible things that happened to Tim Drake. And you see Alfred saying, basically, you are much more Batman right now than Bruce Wayne. And we're going to have to find a way to get you back into the light here. So, it's interesting where that question, I feel like he becomes more Bruce Wayne as the story goes on and he becomes more at peace with both sides of himself. It's almost, it's less of is one pretending to be the other, more they are kind of both at the same time, because Grant Morrison's interpretation of this character is a lot, not crazily so, but a lot more low-key lighthearted, kind of dry humor, kind of taking time to enjoy himself. A lot of his idea of this character is, Bruce Wayne is a billionaire philanthropist, and he should take some time to go on great trips and talk to supermodels and, you know, have sexy adventures, but that's down the road. And, you know, so I would say like right now it's more Batman than anything, especially after his crazy trip in 52, but it is learning to become more at peace with Bruce Wayne and have these things kind of melding in the middle. That's been always been my read of it, especially after, you know, all these comics where it has been just particularly grim across the board at DC, but for Batman for sure.
Fariha, what do you think about this? Do you think right now that Batman and Bruce Wayne really coexist?
I think as the time passed on, he became more Batman and he forgot what it is to be Bruce Wayne. But then again, who is Bruce Wayne? Because it's almost always that he's stuck in the age 10, like, or whenever his parents died, you know, it's pretty much just, you know, it's stuck there. And then Batman, or that version of it, just kind of moved on. I think like the more I kind of took away, like, is like, when Alfred like, oh, you're using your growly voice,
Yes.
normal talking, like, you know, and I just imagine immediately Christian Bale.
I'm not wearing hockey hats.
And I'm not wearing hockey hats. So imagine, like, you know, someone sitting there, like, you know, doing something and then just speaking to you in that voice, you would be upset too, and you would tell them like, hey, you need to focus on your other part. So I feel like like, you know, Alfred is just saying that because he's just annoyed by the whole idea of that is like, ugh, like gross, like, you know, not like, you know, please, cringe. But then the another thing was that he actually, like, there was like one thing that made me laugh right off the bat is that he takes Joker up, right? And we all know that the whole Bane and then the bat breaking and all that, there's the same, very much of the same visual, but he just throws it in the garbage. I thought that was the funniest thing ever. And then that was like the first out the door, like, you know, Morrison setting up the status quo and everything. One thing I would say though, a very good side reading of this is Batman by Paul Dini, the omnibus, or Paul Dini, the omnibus, because it kind of, like, you know, everything that talks about, like, oh, the streets, like, you know, I put away all the criminals and everything. The more aspect of that is actually explored in that omnibus.
Oh, really?
And
yeah,
like, you know, because Riddler is now
a detective.
He's like he has a detective agency who goes head to head with Batman all the time. Harley Quinn later comes in, Poison Ivy later comes in, so it's a very good side companion that kind of explores that avenue of it.
And there's a James Robinson Batman series that's like right when he comes back from 52, and he's actually left a lot of the crime fighting to Harvey Dent as Two-Face, who's had his face repaired, and he's actually working as, that's why in this it's saying like Two-Face is still around, is because for most of this he's been actually helping out on the side of the Angels. So I mean, I really like this opening for the status quo, because you can't look at this opening and not compare it to the beginning of his new X-Men run. If Free, I don't know if you've read that, but it's very much like a addressing of like, this is the status quo, this is what we're used to, this is very familiar, and now we got to throw this out into the garbage and try something completely different. So it's just such like a exaggerated but very familiar thing where Joker's like, I killed Batman in front of some disabled, helpless children. Like it's so like exaggerated, but like it's time for something new in a sense, which I think is fun.
Right. And it's also like kind of sets you up with like that it's going to be something very different. Like, you know, that it's like, oh, we have seen time and time again that Batman will go through the rogue gallery one after the another. But this is the first time where it's like, forget about it. And then also like Commissioner Gordon just sitting in the hospital bed and just laughing his head off was very disturbing. You know, there's two things disturbs me about Gordon, is like him having like rock hard abs, and then him sitting and lying on the bed, like hospital bed, and laughing like that. It's very disturbing thing.
That's a great scene. Yeah, that's a great scene where Gordon's like making fun of the person who died in the paper, like, oh, how'd they even find his neck when they killed him? And then Batman like makes the same joke, which is like Batman's making kind of like low-key jokes in this, which is already like a difference in kind of the it's like a difference in the flavor that you're used to, which I just right from the beginning, there's like, it's a different kind of interpretation, which I like.
And And then no, but the thing is, like Gordon said, that doesn't mean I'm getting better or
Yeah.
worse. That was actually, that sets it up. That sets
It's
up
fun.
whole. That's like the whole summary of their relationship as well. Like it's like, what is it? Ugh. But yeah.
Well, I think part of what's so interesting and is going to continue to be interesting for me about this is I just don't have the DC experience that the two of you do in pre-New 52. So
I don't either.
Well, you do some though. I mean, you've read
You
the
read
Paul
it.
Dini on this. I've read very, very little DC, especially from the 2000s. And I think that's something that you both brought up is that Morrison is playing in an established continuity here. I think it's really easy to start reading this story and assume that Morrison has just wiped the slate clean.
No,
But no, and I think that people assume that in New X-Men too, and they certainly did more in New X-Men. But New X-Men does sometimes interact with other titles in the X line, like Bishop arrives and Bishop's got his own side title at that point. And I think that it's actually, especially in the more modern era of Morrison's writing, a little bit of a misnomer to be like, well, they just are always doing their own thing. It doesn't connect to anything else. No, Morrison loves
definitely
continuity.
not.
And I think that it's interesting for me because I assumed that when I read this first 10 years ago. And to hear you saying all these other things, I'm like, oh, I want to look at this Dini run. I want to look at this Robinson run. So that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
But the other thing I really drilled in on, and Fariha brought it up, was the Bruce Wayne's voice and how his voice connects with his identity. Because we all have phone voice, right? When we're talking to people, like I certainly speak in a deeper voice when I'm not just speaking to friends and casually. I'm like, hello, this is Peter Marineri speaking. I put it down here more, right? Yeah, whoa, it's Batman. And so I think that it's interesting because his voice is like a tell. It's like a bad actor, you know? The actor could be going through all the motions, hitting all the marks, saying all the lines, even with good inflection, but maybe they're forgetting to change something about their voice or their carriage. And I think Morrison, right off the bat, is playing with this idea that Bruce is a master of disguise, but he has forgotten how to disguise himself as Bruce Wayne. He's forgotten actually quite what it takes. And Alfred, who in this run, he talks about being this, actor and former secret agent and all these other things, is basically acting like an acting coach to be like, let's see if we can bring this believable Bruce Wayne back. And I think that things that, do you want to say something there, Priya?
No.
Oh, just that something that Harry said that like really clicked for me is this idea of, is the Bruce Wayne he's portraying the best fit for who he actually wants to be? Like, presumably, it's not always, let me start that sentence again. Which is work, being Bruce Wayne or being Batman? It seems like being Bruce Wayne is work. And we all have the selves who we are at work. And Alfred is basically coaching him and being like, I don't know if this version of it is very believable at all. And I think that, there's a lot of, we could talk about the way people code switch in different groups. We could talk about phone voice versus not. We could talk about people changing their voice to pass in certain situations and be seen as one of a group. But I think that that's all kind of encoded in here, and why Morrison is focusing on his voice rather than his activities. Like, he can go and do all the philandering or whatever, but does it come off as true? So there's
so
go
the
ahead,
thing is,
Priya.
one thing I wanted to mention, that the Batman's voice has always been an interesting thing for me, because I don't know whether it's because of Kevin Conroy, like he
does all the
established
animated,
he establishes Batman voice. Like, it's like you cannot read a Batman story without hearing that. But then also, like, this is something that the Dark Knight trilogy also played with, that whenever I see him in like the Batman, there is no way to kind of hear the growly voice. Like, there is no way that someone who is dressing up like that and say, "Hey guys, what's up?" Versus when I read, like, Dick Grayson as Batman, I actually don't hear that. I don't. It doesn't. It just doesn't come in to my head. So it's like, it's something like, it's like a cultural, like, it's like pretty much like a cultural thing, bro. Not cultural as in like my culture. Like, it's like you know what I mean. But pop culture.
Yeah, it's like
thing
pop
that,
culture.
Of course.
Yeah, pop culture thing of like a Batman voice being a thing. That it's a part of an identity versus not being Bruce Wayne.
Well, in mentioning pop culture, I think, we're going to touch on so many things, but I think we can start to roll into the next issue a little bit, because one of the main themes in issue 656 is what I would call Bruce versus modern art. It's so satisfying, and it's so Morrison. He's in this very highbrow modern art showing. Some of the art is specifically spoofing the works of Roy Lichtenstein. I don't know.
Yes.
I kind of recognize some of the other modern art, but that's not necessarily my art expertise. And Bruce makes some really interesting comments on this as he's walking around. He says, this comic stuff, which a lot of Lichtenstein's art is pop art, that's kind of like single panels of comics, is too highbrow for me. I collect outsider work. And he describes outsider work basically as art not being made by artists. And this is really interesting because Morrison's kind of making an interesting comment on like, so comic makers are artists, but also people who like fine art don't see them as artistic enough, outsider enough to produce anything that's like really challenging. Although Bruce is also flipping that on his head by calling it highbrow. It's really interesting. I think there's a lot to unpack there. Harry, I see you grinning madly down there. What do you want to add to this discussion about Bruce and his relationship with art and art's relationship with comics?
I just love all of this. This is one of the issues. This is the first issue where I was like, oh, this series is really going to pop for me. I really like Grant Morrison's Super Gods book. And in their writing during that, you can tell there's just this deep love of just pulpy, kind of like lower brow arts, like threaded, just sort of, pulp serials and kind of cheap comics and just things that have like this power and this love to it that not everyone can recognize, but it's there. And you can just tell like in this, he's kind of giving this affection to that kind of artwork and that kind of level that might be missed by the upper crust. And, Bruce's opinion of these things is like a whole other aspect that's kind of tougher to parse, because then you kind of look at, Bruce's like perspective comparing to Morrison's and all that. But like this whole issue and all of the work, just talking about Roy Lichtenstein's work and like syncing that up with the action and all of this is like where I realized this is going to be a really fun Batman book, and not in like a shallow or non-essential way, but like in a very like kind of thoughtful, like interesting way, which is great for me.
Fariha, what did you think about this whole art discussion?
So I thought that he was just pretending. Like he was pretending to have an opinion on art when he actually doesn't or care about it. So he was just trying to say something like that would come off as being controversial because that's what Bruce Wayne is, or that's what or maybe he's just too ditzy, that he doesn't understand art, something like that. Because I feel like if I went to an art thing, I would also say the same exact thing. It's like, this is whichever one I've been to, and even if I go to multiple one, I'm like, this is too highbrow for me, guys. I don't understand this. So it just feels like it's a little bit of that. But I laughed out loud when he said that. I know if I just stared at it hard enough, at that like this thing that it just.
I definitely felt like that was Morrison specifically talking through Bruce, kind of saying, people are going to do what we're doing right now. People at that point, they had it done to enough of their work that they know that it would all be analyzed.
Right. It's
kind of a message of like, if you look into the work long enough, all you see is the eye of the beholder.
This feels like Morrison talking.
Yourself.
He's using Bruce they're using Bruce as a conduit through just to speak about all of this stuff, which is just fun,
Right. The thing is, like, I also thought the same way about their what's that one? Not Animal Man, which is Doom Patrol. So I actually stared at the Doom Patrol omnibus after being done with it. I'm like, if I stare at it hard enough, I'm gonna get it, and I kind of did,
that was me with the Invisibles, and I kind of did not, but I kept trying, and I got more out of it each time I read it.
You still have the omnibus behind you. I can see it.
Yes, so, I do. It's right over there. I shall try it again.
In case anyone breaks and enters into Harry's apartment, he
can.
No dust jacket.
But I was fascinated by how the art itself, the background, was used as to get a reaction. It's like
it's so great.
When Jezebel showed up, there's like wow behind her, and then there was like he punches someone and it says ouch, but it's all just the art in the background. But the thing is, it's used as a way to get your reaction out of it, and it's perfectly matched. I just loved it so much. And then there's someone. The one that is like, the people were like, oh my God, look, like people are looking over there, and then it's like, look up in the sky.
it's
It
not
was done perfectly.
and it's not esoteric, it's not like insanely deep, but it's clever and it's utilized so well, and it's just such like a nice, refreshing, breezy kind of kickoff to these stories. It's just like good action done in an interesting way.
And the
And
artist on this issue is Andy Kubert, who
A great
is
Andy Kubert.
Andy Kubert
Yeah.
is a frequent collaborator with Morrison in the first half of Morrison in the second half. And I think
Mhm.
that over time, especially as Andy Kubert has been at DC for now decades, people kind of just think of him as like another Jim Lee kind of artist, draws muscular people, makes them look attractive, because he followed Jim Lee on X-Men. And I think that that's kind of just a reputation he has. And I think sometimes he can be that and sometimes not. But I think the way that he integrates all the pop art, which I looked in the credits, I don't think anybody other than him did it. It's all drawn in this very classical comics way. And his father, Joe Kubert, had been in the industry for decades. He has his own school named after him of comic art. And I think it's really fun to see Andy Kubert flex, because neither Andy or Adam is ever frequently allowed to do this kind of thing. They're just relied upon to come in and deliver and be that blockbuster artist. And so it's really fun that Morrison is like making room for these artists to not always do the thing that you always expect them to do. And I think that that's actually a trend throughout a lot of what I've seen of this Morrison run, is that they really give artists opportunities to be different.
Yes.
But I want to slowly move us into plot now from commentary. So at the end of this modern art discussion in 656, Bruce says, "If there's one thing I hate, it's art with no content." As paired with a splash of him fighting a ninja bat, which brings us to the plot content here, because Talia al Ghul has kidnapped Man Bat, Dr. Langstrom, and she's shaken him loose for his bat, shaking him down rather
Serum.
for his bat serum, and she's sent in League of assassins who are also bats. Why? Because she does want to kidnap somebody from the Prime Minister's wife, but she's also really interested in getting a rise out of Batman and really putting Batman on display for Damian, Batman's son. Now, I want to start with Fariha on this go-round. Damian says, "That's him, that's my father," at the end of 655. Maybe not as starstruck as that, because it is Damian. I hear through the grapevine. Did you know that this was Damian's first proper continuity appearance?
No. So the thing is, I didn't know that they created, like, that Grant Morrison created Damian. I thought that Damian was a thing from 60s, 70s, 80s. And here's the reason why. Because Harry said in one of our PM, "Oh, Grant Morrison did the best voice for Damian." I'm like, "Oh, okay, so Damian has been around." Okay, Harry, if they are the creator, how on earth they are doing the best voices? They're the creator, so obviously the voice they're doing is the established voice.
But compared to
I think
what
you're
some people
basically making my case for
after.
Me. Okay. So are we going to get into this? Okay. So
let's get into it.
I really like Damian. Let's get into it. Okay.
Yeah.
I really like Damian as a character. I think Grant Morrison walks a very fine line with this character where he is a jerk. He's a little snot. He's also got this aristocratic bent to his voice and his mannerisms that I think is very hard to replicate with other writers. I think that is the secret spice of this character that Grant Morrison gets perfectly, because yes, they're the one who wrote him. I totally agree. No, here's the thing. I think, and we'll get into it more as the plot goes along, I don't think anyone has written this character with the right voice sense. I really don't. And yes, I include Tomasi in this. I think writers, because it's such a specific, weird character, that they just substitute that aristocratic mannerism and that snootiness and almost that young person trying to sound like an adult, and they just write it as a young kid who's a jerk. Yes. And that is a different voice. And I get why they kind of had, for whatever reason, DC decided to keep this character around after things happen in this series. I don't think that was the right move.
Well, we'll get into that.
I'm in terms of just the voice and just like what feels authentic, I'm being very snooty, and I'm just thinking the original was the best. Grant Morrison did it right. I don't think we've really gotten a great sense. I think Tomasi's come the closest, but it's not the same thing. It's just
Right.
not.
So, but the thing is like, when people talked, like, when you said that, so I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, so this character has been around for a very long
Okay,
time.
well, that's
for
my
the
bad.
for the first time, a
Yeah.
writer got the voice right,
Yeah.
So that's how I was thinking about it. Because
My
I
bad.
don't look up Google, I don't look up Wikipedias or
Yeah.
stuff like that where people are coming from. And I was like, oh, okay, so that makes sense. So I was ready. And then I'm like, well, if they created it, obviously that's the best voice because they're the creator.
And I think Morrison leaves a wonderful little breadcrumb trail here where they have Alfred reading Artemis Fowl.
Oh my god. Okay.
So my kid
love
has
Artemis Fowl.
read some Artemis
Yeah.
Fowl, and it's like it's almost like Artemis Fowl is the generic way that everybody else will in the future, right, Damian? Like Morrison's got them dead to rights right from the beginning.
Knew.
And like
they knew.
Morrison's like, you're gonna think that it's this. It's not quite this. But
It's
sure,
not.
let me give you the analog that you're going to assume, and it's just like right there to poke fun at later writers. Who get along.
But to that point, though, I also think that the reason Damian lost all the way he talks, because he's now been Americanized. Now he actually lived in America. He kind of understands how kids talk or how kids should be, and that's why he lost it. I mean, that's how I think it.
That's
I
a
think
really nice reading.
To investigate this as we go on.
Yeah.
Damian also ultimately has only had a couple lines so far, so let's not get too far into our
Right.
But I want to put a pin in that. I think there is a code switch / culturalization aspect in it. For sure.
Right, but the thing is, like, I just also want to mention that Artemis Fowl is also kind of, I understand why Alfred will read it, because it's actually about a butler at the end of the day. It's about Artemis's butler. Adobo, I think Adobo is something. I forgot his, like, it's like a very interesting
No, his name was actually Butler, wasn't it? Anyway, let's
Adobo
no
something
Artemis
butler.
Fowl spoilers, people.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's ultimately about a butler taking care of a kid who doesn't necessarily listen to him all the time. So I feel like that's why he is very interested into Artemis Fowl, and he wants to get to it as soon as the book arrives. So I was laughing about that.
Now, there's one thing here. I don't know that we have to talk about it, but because we chose to read a lot of Talia material leading up to this, including the maybe not continuity things, such as the Birth of the Demon and the Bride of the Demon, and what is the third one? Son of the Demon. I have to mention that Batman, when Talia's like, surprise, you're the father, this is the Maury Povich show, that Batman is like, I never consented to be part of your crazy genetic experiments. And Talia, and he intimates he was drugged. Talia says, you cooperated magnificently, which you can take a lot of different ways. So content warning on this for listeners, but just briefly, do you take away the understanding here that Batman was definitively sexually assaulted, or no?
This was written in a different time, and 2006, which I know sounds like it's that long ago, but like my point being, yes, very clearly, I think what's being said here is that he was assaulted, and I think that was played much more shallowly here than it probably would be now. But like reading that Neil Adams book, like he's acting like, you can make the case that he's acting deranged or drugged or what have you, and is not in the right consenting state of mind if you are that addled by some kind of insane substance. And I do view this as like an assault, which is grim, but that was my read.
Fariha?
So remind me, and that's because I kind of flushed all of those out of my head. Because there was the first one where he was kidnapped and was married, because they're like, only the father and the bride, only the father and the bride has to consent. At that time, nothing happened, right?
No, this is the desert with the sword fight.
Desert with the sword fight. But
they're not even together that long in that.
No, but the thing is, when in that time, wasn't they together? Because he was in a full function at that time, because he was the right-hand man of Raj. He was doing all of this. And suddenly when she became pregnant, he was super into her.
No.
Stories. There's the last story in Tales of the Demon where he, with the ski slopes and the Alps, and then he tracks them because of the camel bridle to the desert, and he like knocks him out and brings him up when he gets stung by the scorpion, right? And then there's all the 80s OGNs. And I think, personally, to throw my hat on here, I think that Morrison, actually, I don't think it was as grim as Harry's read. I think that they were writing it such that you can go back and try to choose which story it fits into, and you can decide for yourself if Batman was drugged or not, or if he's basically using this to say, I would never lie with my enemy, but really you did. And I just think it's just a nice little dash that Morrison puts on it to be like, you can always leave this up to your personal interpretation, and I will not say.
Well, no, I
But
totally
here's
agree.
To that point though, why bother with that?
Because
why?
fanboys are always going to be like, well, when did they sleep with each other?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, just don't say
Also,
that.
but
Like,
Grant Morrison,
if
Grant
you're
Morrison
going-
loves tying in continuity in old stories, and this is just like one of the many examples of this in the run. I feel like they wanted to link this to something from the past because that's just kind of the narrative they're trying to tell.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, it wasn't that narrative. They just could have been like, oh yeah, that time, like, just Batman just go ahead and say like, oh damn. Because,
I just want to
because you because like, damn it, like, oh, that's because you've seen the Batman and Son animated movie since then, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So in that one, you remember how, like, finally, spoiler for you, Peter, and our audience, Dick Grayson brings Damian back. Like, it's like, they had a fight and everything. And then Dick is like, after all the time he talks about protection with me. Like,
oh, wow.
Yeah, that's what he says that. And then it's like, yes, Master Grayson. And then that's it. But the thing is, it was such a fun way of doing that, because in that case, like, okay, there was like a consent and he slept and he wasn't sure about the
I always have the benefit of being able to reinterpret the material to add in these moments.
I just want to say, Peter, I agree with you that, like, yes, like, there is enough space in that Neil Adams story that you can take which read you want, but I just am really impressed with how much room there was for Morrison to take their stuff, their writing, and just kind of have it be either way. Like, it's so much less of a retcon than I thought. Like,
now that you've read Tales of the Demon, because I've read this before too, and I just assumed that. But now that I've read Tales of the Demon, I'm like, those stories, A, were amazing, and B, there's a lot of room for
there really is. It's so much more, I use the word a lot, but a lot more elegant than I had realized, which I really, really enjoyed.
But it is also a retcon, though, because the way that that story ends.
But that scene, you're thinking about the other. I'm saying, like, this scene.
There's retcons and there's like brute force retcons. There's retcons that are like, maybe there was something that happened in between the panels, and then there's retcons that are like, you totally saw a lie. I'm going to completely reinterpret.
Yes.
Morrison will use some of those too, and we'll get to that.
This is
okay. I see.
So let's move on to, and I'm going to tackle these together, 657 and 658 here, or actually, I guess 659 is in there as well. Because there's basically, Talia's like, it's your weekend with the kid, and just gives Damian to Batman. And the first thing Bruce says to him, oh my God, is, this is my cave. We'll put your train to do good use to fight crime. And the sense that I really get here is that Bruce immediately is trying to do two things. He's trying to be a good parent in what his view of a good parent is, which he does not really have, because he didn't have parents for a time, even though he had Alfred, and nothing taking away from adoptive and found parents. But he's trying to be dad right now in a way that I don't think we could say that Alfred was specifically. And then also, he's kind of just treating him like a Robin, not because he would treat any kid like a Robin, but because he's like, how do I approach a problem like Damian with coming from the League of Assassins without just using what I've used time and time again on Robins. I have to add, I want to turn it over to you, but there's one more thing that happens so quickly, we might as well just throw it in. But Damian's immune to the good parent routine. He has no interest in being Robin. He none of this is working on him. And Bruce descends very quickly into this very paternalistic, militaristic beratement of Damian to gain his respect. And Damian, to Bruce's credit, he read it right. Damian does respond. Nobody's saying any parent should ever do that, but in the story, it is effective. Harry, what do you want to talk about in there?
Well, first and foremost, like we just gotta admit it, and like fans don't like this arc as much, it seems, because Damien is the absolute worst
He is
in this
terrible,
series.
and I love
He's
him.
the worst. You have to
I
start
love
somewhere. He's such a snot. But this thing you're talking about, where he just becomes like this militaristic, like, this is a scene that makes sense. Like, yes, Batman should, in this situation where you have like this like trained samurai, trained assassin son, like, yes, lean on your combat and militaristic kind of tendencies to get him to listen. But they also do enough shading where he's also approaching him as a student of the martial arts who's bringing shame to like his sensei and what have you. And that's such like a more precise, interesting like take to have in this book than something that could be more generic, I think, with another writer. And it just he's not great in this. I won't even lie, but like that Damien's kind of like a slow burn, kind of like long game character that gets very satisfying. So this is just where that starts. And I just think the page where Batman screams at him is really nice. Batman looks awesome in it.
Fariha, what did you think about the many faces of Bruce Wayne's parenting skills?
So that scene immediately reminded me of Quanon getting one up over Wild Child, and also Hope when she went to find one of the five lights. There was one character she had to be like, right. And then
He's talking about X-Men DC readers.
X-Men,
I don't know if you
exactly.
see them. They put out a few comics a month.
It's another but the thing is, it's instantly reminded me of that, because that's how you kind of treat alpha,
you gotta threat display.
Characters who think they're alpha, because Damian is like, father, these are all mine, as Harry said, his voice and
such a snot.
And then these are all mine, and it's like, no, it's not, it's mine.
Just yelling at each other.
Just yelling, and then it's like, oh yes, you are right, father, these are not mine yet. And immediately he's like switches off. But before that, he was just throwing tantrum all over the place, and then it's just like being like a snotty kid. I absolutely loved it. Like, this is the way sometimes you should treat some of the children.
Okay, we're learning.
Like, so, and even if someone else's children, you should treat them this way, because some people's children.
Well, here's one of the things where I'm actually very qualified to talk about something in a comic book.
Children.
So, my parents were divorced when I was quite young, and I was missing certain parental aspects throughout my whole life that I never really got. I never really saw that, And so I think I've talked about this in other shows before, but sometimes I don't even know what space to hold in like a 2-parent household with a kid when the kid occasionally does something wrong or misbehaves. Like, I never got to see a good cop, bad cop routine. I never got to see both parents presenting a unified front. I never got to see any of those things. And so, like, what do I have really? I have my gut instinct of how to get what I want, which isn't always a good or kind thing to do to a kid. You should understand as a parent. And it takes time to understand that, honestly. Or, I can model what I've seen in other media, or I can, you got to make a decision. And even for parents who came from a beautiful, wonderful, stable 2-parent household that was just lovely, are going to encounter things with their kids that never got modeled for them. And they're going to have to decide in that moment what to do. So like, I really just thought it was interesting, because I'm no perfect parent. I have done dumb things. I've been mistakenly mean to my kid when I probably could have solved something in a kinder, nicer way. And in watching Bruce go through this in the span of pages, I was like, yep, that's a familiar feeling. Like,
well, it's almost,
and almost you like cringe, you like self cringe, like you do one thing and you're like, well, that's going to get the reaction that I wanted in this very second. But that was a tactical mistake that will be used against me in the future.
No, but the thing is, like, I really liked it at that time, because all this time I always thought that Bruce was a terrible father, like Batman, but now I'm like, well, that's not quite the case. He tried, even though it didn't work, because Damian went to go and murder someone in the very next page. At the time,
let's get into that as kind of the last big thing we're going to talk about from this arc. But to get into it, I think we have to talk just for a second about Tim Drake. So Tim Drake is the Robin right now. He is very offended about this whole Damian situation. And even though Damian is a bit younger than Tim Drake, in some ways, his actions immediately infantilize Tim Drake, or causes Tim Drake to infantilize himself, because even though Tim Drake is trying to like hold his space and do the alpha threat display thing, Damian is a savvier actor than Tim Drake. He's willing to do things Tim Drake doesn't do. And I think in that moment that, you know, Tim realizes Damian put one over on him. Damian broke into the Batcave, and then you know, Damian goes off and kills somebody. Tim has this moment where he goes, "Oh God, Batman, he just did my voice." And it really reduces him to me in that moment to this like 8-year-old that's like, he won't stop doing my voice. And it's interesting the effect that Damian has on the other Robins. You know, with Dick, you get him in this very stable paternalistic role. With Tim, it makes Tim seem way less capable and prepared, because Damian's a very different kind of prepared than Tim. And so as part of this whole escapade, he mortally wounds Tim. He escapes and he finds this villain who's just happening on the fringes of the story. It doesn't really matter too much what they're doing. And he beheads him. Although the whole setup of the villain is quite clever, but we don't have to talk about every detail. So to wrap us up, anything you want to talk about in that, about Damian being a murderer, and Tim Drake's relationship with Damian, Harry?
It's just, well, you know, Damian's not balanced. He's like this little killing machine. And he also is, you know, he's got these two things that makes Tim insecure and defensive, which is that he's acting like an adult, and he's acting condescending, and he also has like blood kin to Batman. Both of these things, you know, even though obviously, you know, Batman and Tim Drake are thick as sleeves, that's enough to probably make someone insecure in the moment. The other thing is that basically, you know, I when I originally read this, you know, I was always like, you know, Batman does not kill. I always took like Damian killing this villain so quickly and then just kind of glossing over it to be like, we got moving on for the sake. But you know, rereading all the Golden Age comics and what have you for this, you know, Batman did kill in the beginning, and obviously that's been kind of passed over and kind of fixed. But like I can see more of the read that like he's more accepting of like an early sin to be kind of taught out of him, because if we're taking all this as continuity, that is something that has happened with Batman. Or maybe I've just chilled out as I've gotten older, who can say. But
Free, what did you think about this?
So the thing is, this is probably a good time to say that I actually read this arc before, like, you know, way back when, even though at that time I didn't realize that this is the first appearance of Damian. I thought this is a, you know, because DC keep on rebooting. So I'm like, this is a reboot.
Sure.
You know, so since this issue, I lost all respect for Team Drake. And anytime Team Drake shows up, I'm like, ugh.
He comes off a little weak in this. There's no denying it. I like Tim Drake, but you know, it just, since then I can't just forget about this, because I'm like, ugh, like, you know, seriously, I can't overdo you like that. Even though it's Damian, I get that. But the thing is, it was really sad though. Like one time, it's like, oh, there's a kid, like it's your kid. What does that mean about us? And I'm like, I don't know, Tim. Let's just wait and see what Tim's still like a kid. That's like a very normal human reaction, because Tim's like a human, where Damian's like this little specialized. He's like 16, 17
at the most.
Oh, okay. In that case,
yeah, he's young.
Him, because
I don't even think he's 17. Because I think he's going to college early in Rebirth. So like, I think that puts him at max of 16 at Rebirth, and I think Batman.
I think 16.
I always thought that he was 20.
No.
He's young.
Oh wow.
Especially with the time compression in New 52, I don't think that's.
Oh, okay. Because I always thought he was 20, and that really put a like, you know,
a damper on that.
Like it is like, oh really? Why?
I think this scene is like very much the reason. I remember I said Tim Drake is one of my favorite members of the Bat family, and this actually weirdly reinforced that for me, because it's the thing I like about him is that his A student nature is what makes him fallible. Like he's fighting in the way he thinks he should fight. He's doing the things with Batman that he thinks he should do. And it just doesn't always work for you. And it goes back to the whole Batman voice thing at the beginning of this. I don't know that Grant Morrison is so interested in Tim Drake, but I think in the same way, that Batman can't nail the voice and he's not being his authentic self as Bruce Wayne, Tim Drake thinks that being an A student is enough to be a great hero. And sometimes that really fails him, because being a hero is more than just being an A student. Like, you've got to have some soul in underneath of that. And I think that this is just a great little bottle example of it. Even if Morrison, I don't remember this run at all, having read some of it. So I don't remember if Morrison ever writes another line for Tim Drake, but I definitely got that here. And, you know, really, I also think it reveals something interesting about Damian. At the end, Damian gets Bruce to respond in that stern, militaristic father way. And that's when Damian turns from a monster Damian back to kid Damian. It's what he wanted. He doesn't want human Bruce Wayne. He doesn't want Batman as Batman might really be. He wants Batman as Talia told him Batman was all of this time, which in reality, anybody who's really Batman's son, like the Robins, doesn't think that. Even if his villains think that, even if Talia assumes that or put that thought into Damian's head, who knows if she ever really believes anything. That's not actually who Batman is. And Damian is like, just give me this Batman that I've been promised. Which I think a lot of readers come in asking for. Quite frankly, Morrison, again, always levels.
Morrison's not interested in that interpretation. They have just, this is what you're saying is coming at a time where Batman and Bruce Wayne is being much more humanized weirdly and is finding some kind of more color and personality than we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
No, one thing I was going to say that I always kind of wanted Damian to kind of remain that annoying who'd never understood that we don't kill. Like, I wish that was kind of held on, like for him, that, you know, that he was like always kind of like, it's like, we don't kill, and he just going around and killing, or like, you know,
I mean,
like not learning. But I know that there is a little bit of that, but I think it was kind of beaten out of him as things went on. But I kind of wish, like, you know, because when I saw that part of it, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of nice.
If we're getting to the next issue now, like the best part of like this is, sorry, we'll pause. Are we still talking about like the arc where like
we're wrapping up? I'm like about to make my final comment on Batman.
Okay. So I mean, for me, the best part of this entire arc, and it kind of like, this is where you start to see the actual person beneath what Damian's pretending and projecting to be, is when he and Batman launch up in that rocket ship, and there you have this page where Damian says, you have a rocket, and Batman says, I have a lot of stuff nobody knows about. And there's this one page, there's one panel of Damian upside down where he's got this tiny happy smile, and it's showing for all this bluster in the League of Assassins training, what have you, he's still a kid who's excited the idea of being in a rocket. And this is the start of seeing this character who starts off as like the worst person in the world become more of an actual human. And there is such a deftness and a less is more thing that Morrison does with this character, and small beats like that carry throughout this entire run. And I love Morrison because they get so much personality and so much to infer from small pieces of dialogue and small moments that just build and build as you go on. It's not like a ton of stuff, but it really does land every time. And I'm going to definitely keep tabs on that as we all get further into the series.
Well,
it really disappointed me that, you know, we didn't get more of that. Like in the amount, like, you know, there was like only one shot of that, like as they were launching in the rocket, and there's like,
stories.
Oh, like, you know, I know all about you. You didn't know I had a rocket, like, you know, and that, like, you know, those kind of things. I was like, more of this.
It's going to happen. It will.
Well, this ends with an interesting beat. You know, they chase down Talia. Talia basically says, reform me, Batman. Damian's part of a bigger play for her. She's not just giving up temporary custody of her son. She wants something too. She's always wanted something. She always wants something. And she ends by saying, ours is a love story, remember, which Batman might have a different opinion on. And then she blows them all up and maybe dies, maybe Damian dies. We know that's probably not the case, but it kind of leaves this in the way that a lot of Golden Age and Silver Age stories are left, where this totally unusual thing happens. And at the end of the story, it's like, so much for that. And Morrison kind of goes on to focus on some other things in the next few stories. So we are going to end our conversation about Batman and Son there. If you want to hear us continuing to talk about this, we are going to cover every bit of material that is in the Batman by Morrison omnibuses. So just keep staying tuned with us. And Fariha, why do we get together to read Batman? Have you figured it out yet?
No, I haven't. There was like one thing we talked about last time, and I don't like it. So no, we're still waiting.
It won't be repeated.
Yeah, it won't be repeated. It's
not really a t-shirt worthy slogan.
No, I mean, Tyler would look down on us in disgust when he hears all of this. So yeah, so we're still kind of waiting why we are reading it, you know.
Leave comments if you have an idea.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to figure out why we're reading it. It's a lot of fun.
I mean, it's good, right? But we don't know intrinsically.
Yeah, intrinsically why. Yeah, you know, maybe because we're just You're a bunch of Marvel fans.
All
Well,
right.
until we figure that out, and until next time, on behalf of Harry, Fariha, and myself, this has been our Crushing Comics book club reading Grant Morrison's Batman. And until we get to talk to you again, we hope that you're well.